weeping willow how to cry, and I showed the clouds how to cover up a clear blue sky. And the tears that I cried for that woman gonna flood you, big river, and I'm gonna sit right here until I die. I met her accidentally in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it tore me up every time I heard her drawl, southern drawl. Then I heard my dream, went back downstream, cavorting in Davenport, and I followed you, big river, when you called. Later on, down the river, a freighter said she's been here, but she's gone, boy, she's gone. I found her trail in Memphis, but she just walked up the bluff. She raised a few eyebrows and then she went on down low. Now won't you bat it down by Baton Rouge, River Queen, roll it on. Take that woman on down to New Orleans, New Orleans.
From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. The title of our episode, Amy Klobuchar of the Mississippi, on the 13th of February 2019. We at WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network are attempting to highlight many of the candidates running for the president in 2020. We had Beto O'Rourke, otherwise known as Robert Francis O'Rourke of El Paso, Texas. He was participating in a community march for humanity and humane treatment of people coming across the border, El Paso, of course, being a border city in Texas. And at the same time, DJ Trump, chief executive, was holding a rally inside of the Coliseum. And the debate immediately over the number of people being in there, we found from the El Paso Fire Department there was 6,000 people in there, and press accounts of Beto O'Rourke, 10,000 people marching through the streets of El Paso, and they ended up in a park a few blocks from where DJ Trump was. And you can go to that particular broadcast, The Wall, and Beto, or Beto and The Wall. Anyway, nonetheless, you will find that on many of our feeds there. Amy Klobuchar announced her candidacy for the president in the cold on the banks of the Mississippi River. That's the reason we're using the Mississippi as a theme here, because the Mississippi starts in northern Minnesota, where Amy Klobuchar's relatives come from, where you can walk across it, and it moves down through the Twin Cities area on to Iowa, and via Iowa down skirts Illinois and to St. Louis. And from St. Louis, it meanders all the way to New Orleans and the Gulf of Mexico. Very, very long river. You can watch the barges coming down from Duluth, that is in northern Minnesota, with the iron ore, and they eventually come through the locks and dams of the Twin Cities and down the Mississippi River. Also, we have there Lake Superior, which borders both Wisconsin and Michigan. So you have that Midwest area there, and that is what her campaign is about. If we look at the states that immediately border Minnesota, Iowa for one, in the 2008 campaign, which I'm familiar with, of Barack Obama of Illinois. Hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, volunteers came in from Minnesota into Iowa. That was some of the backbone of Barack Obama's campaign, and of course many came also from Chicago. Easy to come there from those two locations. It's also easy for people from Minnesota to go in Iowa to Michigan or into Wisconsin. Wisconsin, if I recall correct, I don't have my cheat sheet here, but it has 10 electoral votes. It is normally not a state that is very well polled. It is a working class state, and it would be a state where an Amy Klobuchar would do well. However, though, there are other people in this race. Bernie Sanders of Vermont done very well in Wisconsin. We don't know at this point what Vice President Biden would do. We do know that in Iowa he would have many of the officials in Iowa in his corner. So when you start looking at the landscape, when you're Amy Klobuchar, incidentally, she raised about $1 million, a little over $1 million. Kamala Harris raised a little more than hers, but Kamala Harris, I get her name right, is going to need as much money as she can get, particularly in the states. Now, this is sort of how the map is going. The candidates, of course, will start out next winter in the snows. Maybe the snows, may not be the snows. In some years it was snows. Recall Hillary the Monster Clinton bought the shovels for the little old ladies, and it didn't snow. Those shovels are still out there, and I doubt if Hillary Clinton has ever paid for those shovels. She's notorious not paying her bills. But anyway, nonetheless, that is the first stop. And then we go to New Hampshire. That is the backyard of Senator Sanders, Senator Warren. Incidentally, we also will have Senator Warren. She kicked off her campaign in the historic city of Lawrence, Mass., where there was a great strike and struggle there by women working in the textile industry at the time. So we'll get those up, and then we'll have some of the ones that are not known as we move through this season. And this is February, African History Month. We'll get to some of those presentations also. We're a little bit behind here. We have an open source report that is about finished. We'll get that out this week. We said that the last 3 weeks, but we will get it out this week. We've been setting up a media server, and that media server is basically about finished using open source software like Audacity, which we're using now. But we'll have more things there, tools, etc. Anyway, that is on the technical side. We'll move back to the campaign at hand. How does she do this? Well, we'll go to a blueprint written by none other than Nate Silver. We always like to get a little bit of analytics here, and we'll get to the analytics in a minute. And we'll do the sports. As far as current news, well, the wall or no wall, shut down or no shutdown. After Friday midnight to figure that out. DJ Trump basically said he will sign the bill. One of his lackeys, I think it was McCarthy, said that the Democrats capitulated, caved. Well, they didn't cave at all. What they did is they're giving him maybe a fourth of what he asked there, and some other things are thrown in at the same time. So we'll see. And there's a major bill that passed the Senate. It'll pass the House dealing with wildlife. We'll have that on our broadcast, but that is a major bill, and no doubt DJ Trump will sign that because it passed the Senate by, I forget the total number, but it was in the single digits that voted against it. One was Mike Lee of Utah. But there are various things in that bill, from Confederate parks to new lands to new monies for wildlife. The Conservative Wildlife Federation, I think it is, the Montana, they supported, and most of the other ecological organizations will support this because this is the best that they quote-unquote can do. And they haven't passed anything in about 10 years there. So that is in the legislative sense coming up. Back to Amy Klobuchar and this river strategy of hers. For those that recall the 2000 campaign, the one that was stolen from Albert Gore of Tennessee, Albert Gore started in St. Louis on the river and took a riverboat trip while people were doing their vacations all the way down to New Orleans. I don't know if Amy Klobuchar will do that. I don't know if she'll ride trains or ride a bicycle. She still has some snow to, as they say, speak in, a snowstorm. You'll see a picture of her literally in a snowstorm. You can't see her there, But she made that, and you'll get that in its entirety in a few minutes. We started off with Mr. John Cash, the late Johnny Cash, and Big River. I think it's a very good theme song for her. Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, she used 5 to 9. That's by Dolly Parton. Immediately struck her working class roots. One of the things that struck me, this speech, and you'll get a lot of articles out here that Amy Klobuchar, the pragmatic person, the pragmatic candidate, the middle-of-the-road candidate, etc., some detrimental things from the Huffington Post, called her an office bully with some of the staff. Well, you hear all kinds of things. But these things come out in the early days, and people forget about them as quickly as they go. When it boils down, as the candidates all come in, we don't know if Beto O'Rourke will come in now. We don't know if Vice President Biden will come in. There are a lot of question marks are still there as this race shapes up. And then some of the lesser-known types out there, like Sherrod Brown, who didn't endorse the the Green New Deal. Incidentally, the the Senate leader, old man McConnell, is going to bring it up. He first said he wouldn't because obviously not going to pass the Republican Senate, but it's a non-binding resolution. It's interesting to see where these people stand. Several presidential candidates have already endorsed it. So again, these are things that will get into the presidential race in 2020. But how many of them will stand? Well, in primaries, particularly in the Democratic Party, some of the candidates will veer more to the activist center, and that's what you have out there in Iowa. You have more of a left-of-center activist center, and in many of these primary states, you will have that. But as the general election comes, these positions will move in the other direction. And that's not a problem when you're running against a DJ Trump. But can't keep his crowd straight. He was immediately rebuffed, not only in crowd size, but on El Paso being safer because of the wall and not correct. And this is one of the problems with social media. You can come out with all sorts of things there and immediately be exposed as a liar. And that is a situation. I had one with Ilhan Omar. She was talking about McDonald's and some statistics as to what McDonald's paid, and the federal hourly rate is still $7.25. Now, you're talking about McDonald's all over the place, and evidently some staff member that put it together seen $7 that was in Poland. But again, just because someone is getting $7 an hour or $10 an hour after their withholding, they are not getting that. So you need to be cognizant of that. If you're getting $15 an hour, how much is the worker really realizing out of the check? We'll have some of those figures for you. But on to the 538 and Amy Klobuchar. The question here, and this is written by Nate Silver on the 10th of February. How Amy Klobuchar could win the 2020 Democratic nomination. Amy Klobuchar announced her candidacy for president in Minneapolis on Sunday, became the 5th Democrat out there, and he names some of the people that have announced already: Kamala Harris, Twitter King Cory Booker, and Elizabeth Warren, who had been expected to run for years. Klobuchar, a little bit more of a homespun independent label candidate. Nate Silver's there, but being an indie on an indie label has its upsides and downsides. On one hand, there is a perceived authenticity. You'll hear that word authenticity out there quite a bit. The ability to build a momentum from modest expectations. On the other hand, there's a question of whether your product can get into the hands of the consumer without having a major label marketing muscle behind it. And if so, whether you can expand beyond your niche audience. So this article is meant to provide a relatively comprehensive assessment of Klobuchar's strengths and weaknesses, rather than being either a devil's advocate argument or a best case scenario. if it is informed by conversations with by conversation with Klobuchar's campaign as well as with unaffiliated Democrats, but the opinions and analysis here are my own. This is Nate Silver, and you'll see that I think Klobuchar's upside outweighs her downsides, but there are plenty of materials in both columns. Potential advantages, electability, you'll hear that word quite a bit from all the candidates. Democrats really want to beat DJ Trump. A Monmouth University poll found 56% of Democrats prefer someone who would be a strong candidate against Trump, even if they disagree with the candidate on most issues, compared with 23% who held the opposite view. What is meant to be electable is something in the eye of the beholder. The term sometimes seems to be euphemism for a good-looking white guy, a European guy who isn't too liberal. Hello, Beto. But Klobuchar could make some good data-driven arguments for her electability. One of them is simply the overall electoral importance of the Midwest, particularly the upper Midwest states of Minnesota, which Trump came within 1.5 of winning. Wisconsin and Michigan, which he won. Winning of those three states plus Pennsylvania and Ohio or Florida or North Carolina could have would have given Hillary Clinton the presidency. She didn't do any of those. And the path of least resistance for Democrats to retake the White House. There's also Klobuchar's strong performance in Minnesota to consider. She was first elected in 2006, a 20-point margin, and then re-elected in 2012 by 35 points, and in 2018 by 24 points in each case. She performed well statewide, not just in the core Twin Cities, winning 79 to 87 counties in 2006, 85 of 87, it's a lot of counties in 2012, then declined to 52 of 87 counties in the recent election 2008. But given the massive swing towards Trump and Republicans in rural counties, elsewhere in the Midwest, Klobuchar still did better than many Democrats. The first class of first-tier Democratic senators, such as Klobuchar, have been blessed not to face elections or re-elections in red-waved cycles. 2006, 2012, 2018, all been blue years. Needlessly, Klobuchar has performed strongly relative to other Democrats in the same election. Below, for example, you see the outputs from a regression analysis that calculates expected results in each two, and I'll append this, of 2018 Senate races based upon every state's partisan lean. How much more Republicans or Democrats it is than the country as a whole, where each party had an elected incumbent running. According to the analysis, you'd expect a Klobuchar Democratic incumbent in a blue year, but in a purple state to win re-election by 14 points, and said she won it by 24 points, beating the model's expectation by 10 points. That rates as the third strongest performance for a Democrat for Senate last year, slightly behind Joe Manchin. He's from West Virginia, and of course Vermont's Bernie Sanders. And just ahead of Beto O'Rourke in Texas, amongst other actual potential Democratic candidates who ran Senate races in 2018, Kirsten Gillibrand also performed relatively well in this matrix, whereas Sherrod Brown got an average rating, and in Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren a poor one. That's not to say you can expect Klobuchar to taunt her electability on the campaign trail, which the first rule of electability is that you don't talk about it, but it's an argument that we are liable to hear a lot from surrogates. In other words, you send out the lackeys. potential strengths in Iowa and in the debates compared to candidates such as Harris and O'Rourke, who might hope to blitz their way to victory on the basis of strong fundraising and early delegate accumulation. Of course, in California and Texas, Klobuchar is probably playing a long game, but doing so also requires two important mile markers. First, success in the debates, then strong performance in the Iowa caucuses. That requires organization. Klobuchar team believes that she has two advantages in the debates. First, like Harris, she's a former prosecutor, having been a county attorney in Minneapolis's Hennepin County, a skill that should translate well into sharp elbow stage on the debate stage. Second, she could be candid and funny, potentially allowing her to surpass expectations among voters who expect Midwest blandness. Our Minnesota nice, that's what killed Walter Mondale. It's a credible enough case, but Klobuchar, who starts out with name recognition, below 50%, that is a problem right there, because Elizabeth Warren, everyone knows Elizabeth Warren, they know Bernie Sanders, and Kamala Harris is trying to get known. And it's a simple name, Harris. Her potential to succeed in Iowa is more obvious. She will probably be the only major candidate in the race from a state that borders Iowa and one relatively few Midwesterners in the field. And in her statewide races in Minnesota, she relied heavily on a retail approach to politics. That will help her not only in Iowa but in New Hampshire. Sometimes that would translate well in Iowa. Looking at past results for Iowa's caucuses makes it pretty clear that there is a regional advantage in this contest. The region has a strong retail skills that, of course, describes Beto O'Rourke and, according to Silver, Twitter King Booker. Beyond Iowa, the path is less clear. In New Hampshire's open primary system, voters typically favor liberal New England such as Sanders and Warren, and the electorate gets much less white after Iowa and New Hampshire, whereas Klobuchar's strength with non-white voters are less than obvious. So she'll be hoping for polling bounce out of Iowa. No doubt she has to get that. The beer truck without the baggage, Klobuchar's campaign is likely to emphasize her working class Midwest roots. Her staff says you'll hear about her grandfather working as an iron ore miner. Not many of those around anymore. For instance, it will also pitch her to voters on candor, honesty, pragmatism, and ability to get things done. The work ethic and so far, no doubt that came about in her staff environment. It's going to lean pretty heavily into Midwesterners. In other words, the idea is to draw a contrast, probably softly at first, and maybe more explicitly as the campaign grows more combative between Klobuchar, Sanders, and perhaps Booker. In some cases, it will, you recall the old distinction between the beer truck and the flyover moderates and wine truck coastal liberals. However, Klobuchar isn't likely to have the beer truck to herself. Sherrod Brown, they mentioned him, will be playing in the same lane, but nobody knows him anyway. The person could play that is Joe Lunchbox Biden, no doubt about it. Then you also might call a craft beer truck consist of candidates who are from the middle of the country, but whom's appeal might be strong amongst the college educated. That would be Beto O'Rourke, founder of a craft brewer, John Hickenlooper, used to be the governor of Colorado. Do you mean what does that mean? Is Klobuchar likable to run exclusively as a moderate campaigner, for instance, against policies such as Medicare for all? Now, this was very interesting. I noticed in her speech, as I was taking notes, that she got in universal health care. Boy, she moved from that so quick that the media wouldn't have got it, but we got it. So she's got universal health care. That's something that's been on the agenda of the Democratic Party since Harry S. Truman of Independence, Missouri. And on to Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, and you go there to Bill Clinton. Anyway, he had Hillary Clinton. Anyway, that was something else. Her campaign wouldn't quite say as much, instead of describing her as a pragmatist and a realist. But that is a fuzzy distinction at best. Let's see. But there is an interesting twist to Klobuchar's triangulation here. Although she has a relatively modest voting record, it's a fairly liberal relative to Minnesota, which depends its reputation as a bastion of liberalism, and is a purple state. That purple state, not certain about that. It's a working class state. How purple it is, well, it's on and it's off. It's been pretty close. Barack Obama, I believe, carried the state by 4 something points, maybe 5 something. I looked that one up. Democrats are already running for president, are clearly telegraphing a run there. Klobuchar has the 12th highest Trump score. She voted with Trump often, at 31.5% of the time, trailing only former Maryland Representative Joe Delaney amongst the candidates. Well, forget about him. But she has the 10th lowest Trump plus minus rating, meaning that she voted with Trump less often than you can expect someone from a purple state. Only Oregon's Jeff Merkley and Brown and Representative Ryan from increasingly red Ohio had a lower Trump minus rating amongst potential candidates. Well, they aren't really there. By contrast, Beto O'Rourke would vote with Trump slightly less often than Klobuchar, had the highest Trump minus rating in the field because he represents an extremely blue district excuse me, in El Paso, Texas, who has a Republican mayor. To all this, I'd say Klobuchar may well try to fixate the distinction between being a moderate and a realist. However meaningful that distinction is, might or might not be the Democratic voters. We'll see on that one. A lot of it will depend on how it's set up in Iowa. Klobuchar also has some other arguments to make against the rest of the beer truck candidates, or at least she's arguably less baggage than the rest of them. Her candidacy, her credentials in 20 years in a public office are sound by presidential standards. Unlike Beto O'Rourke, she isn't 76 years old. No, she's not. As Biden, she doesn't represent a state that is heavily invested in the financial industry, which is a problem for Biden. Well, Delaware, yeah, everybody's there. For all of the New York and New Jersey people, well, they've been there. The beer truck will likely also be dominated by men, including candidates Biden, O'Rourke, Brown. I forget about the rest of them. So Klobuchar could have enough strength with working class women and overlook an important part of the Democratic base. They voted for DJ Trump. And of course, also possible that the beer truck is a road to nowhere. Democratic delegates are allocated are based on the number of Democrat votes for president in each state, meaning that they are deliberately biased towards blue states. A reasonably clear contrast to Trump. Well, any Democratic candidate do that. Barack Obama, as Barack Obama did against G.W. Bush, Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush, but you had Ross Perot in the middle. I still think the theory is mostly true, and that Klobuchar is above an average Democrat in her degree of non-Trumpness. That's an interesting term. I hadn't seen that in the lexicon. I want to hedge against it a little bit. The version of Klobuchar we seen in the debate and on the campaign trail may be scripted, blunted, and more emotional than people are expecting. Towards the stamp may facilitate those perceptions. Moreover, to the extent that her campaign is drawing distinctions between her beer truck persona and the wine track liberal from the coast, she'll in some ways be echoing the argument that Trump made about the Democrats. Well, she may be more succinct, but I'm not sure about it. Two potential problems. We'll get to these last. The lack of a clear path with non-white voters. They tried to say the same about Kamala Harris. Is not quite as white as you'd think, but they do have Ilhan Omar. They're home to several immigrant groups, including some relatively small ones, such as the Somalis, Laotians, and don't forget about, and its non-white population has grown significantly since 2000. Needlessly, as of 80% of the population was non-Hispanic European, compared with 61% in the U.S. itself. Well, Vermont is in the other direction. This is not to say that European politicians can't find appeal with non-white voters. John Kerry did quite well with African Americans. He did indeed. If you recall, there was Louis Farrakhan out there with his hat on, and he just said vote. And followers of O.J. Simpson, African Americans, knew how to vote. They voted overwhelmingly for John Kerry, Brother Kerry there. This year, the Democratic field features several people of color, however, and Klobuchar doesn't have any obvious strategy to appeal to African Americans, Latinos, or Asians. I guess she's conceding those to if, in fact, Beto O'Rourke appeals there. Beto O'Rourke, in our presentation there, Paso spoke both in English and Espanol. Together will make up 40% of the Democratic primary electorate. And this is what happens, remember, in New Hampshire, that we put out publicly that Barack Obama could not win New Hampshire, because we knew New Hampshire will. Anyway, nonetheless, and he did not. But as he turned, things got closer in Nevada. Hillary Clinton stole some of the caucus votes out there. But we went south then as before him, Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, to South Carolina, and the follows O.J. Simpson, and the whole map changed. Instead, several of her likely strategic choices, running on a beer trunk, heavily investing in Iowa, perhaps in New Hampshire, with emphasizing trying to capture as much of the European vote as possible before turning to minorities. Well, it doesn't matter that much. In a presidential election, it's totally different. A national presidential election, the sweepstakes is with the followers of O.J. Simpson. They will determine this election. DJ Trump knows that. That's why he wants to try to get 10%. Isn't likely to have a lot of initial appeal to the left. That's in her hometown newspaper talked about that. She may subtly and selectively. She's been running around over on NBC with old Rachel Muldrow. Or she may run explicitly towards the Senate, depending on who enters the race. No doubt about that. A little bit early for that prediction. The five corners don't capture everything. In particular, they don't account for voters' gender, even around the fifths. Now, this is the five quarters here. African American voters, millenniums, the left, and party loyalists. Joe Biden will get the party loyalists. Who gets the millenniums is up in the air. That will be between Beto O'Rourke, if he shows up. Bernie Sanders, no doubt about that. Bernie Sanders is the left, and not party loyalists. So The five corners don't capture everything. 3/5 of Democrats will be women, no doubt about that. But where's Elizabeth Warren in this scenario? This doesn't mean that her campaign will need to proceed in the stages without necessarily having a lot of margin for error. First, she has to perform well in the debates and town halls. Kamala Harris is trying to set herself up as a town hall queen, to vault herself ahead of the other beer truck candidates. Each stage holds risks for Klobuchar. She doesn't have a lot of shortcuts or detours there, no doubt about it. Staffing and campaign building support amongst insiders. We already went over the Huff and Puff slander articles. These rumors have been widespread for a long time. To insert myself as a barometer here, as someone who doesn't live in Washington, who is sort of ambivalent to political gossip, I hear about them several times, and in some ways the Huff and Puff Post, BuzzFeed, notorious there. Stories are relatively general in that they don't contain that many details, are largely anonymous. And a woman usually that exhibits this type of behavior, according to Nate, is a bitch. I said he didn't. Anyway, they also reek of inside baseballness. Having a reputation as a bad boss can be problematic within the industry, but without saccharous details, it's not the sort of scandal that voters are likely to have. No, voters are trying to get away from DJ Trump. It's the same time the nomination process is to some extent inside game. As the Huff and Puff story claims, they had trouble recruiting the layers of highly talented staff that other candidates have, because of a reputation well earned or not, of being abusive. Well, that does have something to do with it. Dysfunctional staffs, you can just ask Hillary Monster Clinton about that. Not that she was abusive to the staff. No, she was not. But the problem was, in the end, she had a staff that was ineffective. DJ Trump, it has his White House with a ineffective staff, but because of the way his dysfunction doesn't matter. So I'm be looking to whether Klobuchar is able to gain a few endorsements in the early stage of a campaign, especially from outside of her home state of Minnesota. The Beltway elites could play into Klobuchar's brand as a tough, no BS outsider, but it's really hard to get completely alone in the primaries, especially when the strategy involves winning over one faction of the party first, the beer truck, and then building bridges to the other. Well, if you're running a working class campaign, the unfortunate problem for Amy is if Joe Biden enters the campaign and Beto O'Rourke, they're going to be both. We'll have three people competing for that beer truck, and all will have their hands on the six-pack. So that in itself, you have to go outside of that. Beto O'Rourke will go to his Latinos. Joe Biden would go from his working class roots to his African Americans who know him well. So in other words, his situation there is interesting, especially in New Hampshire, his appeal to working class people. And don't forget about Bernie Sanders. I haven't talked as much about him. He's the man that would, if he got the nomination of the Democratic Party, he would have been the president. So he's still very strong. Killer Mike talked about that. We don't know if Bernie's going to run now or not. We don't know if Beto O'Rourke's going to run. We don't know if Senator Sanders will run. So those are some questions out there. What's my opinion? Well, we won't know. This is February. We have to get into the spring and find out who the candidates will be. Now, some of these candidates could wait literally until as late as June to come into the primary if they already have a name recognition. We'll see who is hanging around MSNBC. I don't watch it, but we get it on Twitter, who is there, who is not there, trying to get their names up. Kamala Harris will probably try to have more town hall meetings. Bernie has been having them. He's in West Virginia. We didn't talk about West Virginia. But see, Bernie has been in all these states before, so he has name recognition, including Iowa and even in California, when the majority of the California Democrats, at least office holders, were in favor of Hillary the Monster Clinton. So it was a different kind of situation out in California, a very costly state, but Bernie stayed on the road. Let me do the sports now. We'll go to Major League Basketball. We're at the Hawks in Atlanta, wish they would have stayed in L.A., 117 to 113, Hawks. The Celtics were at the 76ers in Philadelphia. Celtics 112 to 109. The Spurs at the Grizzlies, a 1-point game there. Spurs pull it out 108 to 107. The Magic were at the Pelicans, the other end of the Mississippi River, from where Amy Klobuchar is hoping to sail. 118 to 88 Magic. And the Jazz were at the Warriors 115 to 108. On to men's basketball. We had Duke University at Louisville. Duke 171 to 69. Incidentally, Coach K is 72 years old. LSU, and I think it's his birthday today or yesterday. I think it's today. LSU 73 to 71 over the University of Kentucky. Michigan and Penn State. It was Penn State 75 to 69 over Michigan, Marquette, and DePaul. It was all Marquette 62 to 73. Michigan State and Wisconsin. It was Wisconsin 67 to 59. Purdue and Maryland. The Terrapins at 70 to 56. Kansas State and Texas. It was Kansas State 71 to 64. And finally, Buffalo and Akron. Buffalo 76 to 70. The women's basketball, I think we only have one score. Texas and Oklahoma State. It was Texas 61 to 55. And the National Hockey League, we had the Blackhawks and the Bruins. Bruins 5 to 3. Make sure something there. Looks 6 to 3. Yeah, 6 to 3. Okay. Don't have my glasses on, but anyway, Bruins 6 to 3 there in Boston. The Blackhawks of Chicago and the Sabres and Islanders. It was the Sabres 3 to 1. Oops. Get my pointer going here. The Stars and Panthers. It was the Stars. They shut out the Panthers 3-0. The Capitals and the Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets 3-0. They shut out the Capitals, the Hurricanes, and the Senators. It was Hurricanes 4 to 1. The Flames of Philadelphia and the Lightning. It was the Lightning 6 to 3. The Devils and Blues in St. Louis. Blues 8 to 3. The Red Wings and Predators. It was Red Wings 3 to 2. Oops, the Philadelphia's the Flyers. Sorry about that. Anyway, Flyers are 6 to 4 over the Wild, and the Rangers and Winnipeg Jets. It was Winnipeg Jets 4 to 3. And the Maple Leafs and Avalanche. It was the Avalanche 6 to 2. The Coyotes and the Golden Knights of Vegas. It was the Coyotes 6 to... Ooh, that was 5 to 2. That's the reason I put my glasses on here for these. Okay. It was the Coyotes 5 to 2, and it was the Maple Leafs also 5 to 2. And that is the end of the hockey scores. Let's see. We were looking at Major League Baseball. Nothing new here. Some trade talks. Will Joe Madden be around? Will this be his last year? It possibly could be his last year in Chicago with the Cubs, especially if he doesn't produce anything. We'll see on that one. Let me just check very quickly here to the latest polls that we have. We haven't had a lot of polling recently here. At Real Clear Politics. This is early in the political season, and usually the only thing we're getting is approval levels, and unless you're dealing with an outliner like the Rasmussen NS, yes, the only thing we have here They disappeared. That was Monday. Direction to the country. Wrong track is up by 15. Strange polling at best here. Matchups, we'll just give we don't even have. Let's see if we can get some matchups. Well, Amy Klobuchar had 3, and this is an Emerson University poll. Do they match her up with Trump? No, she's not matched up there. Virtually Trump is ahead of everyone in the Emerson poll except for Joe Biden. So it's too early to determine what is going on. Anyway, nonetheless, Amy Klobuchar of the Mississippi. Had to make sure I'd written that one down, playing around with that. But nonetheless, this will do it for us on the 13th of February. Boston Red here from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Hopefully, Nate's update there, his plus and minus for Amy Klobuchar, the working class candidate. We have summing that up. The beer truck or the 6-pack. I don't call it a 6-pack Amy. That's that's more of a Joe Biden kind of thing. But I also wouldn't term her a craft beer person either. I don't even know if Amy Klobuchar drinks beer, but or drinks anything. But the whole point is there, we don't know. Karma Harris, coming obviously from California, she'd be associated with wine. A lot of wineries around and in Northern California, no doubt about that. She would be there. Quitter King Booker, yeah, well. Anyway, I won't comment on him. But the story there is of these characters here, it starts to shape up. I think the bottom line or the takeaway here is we really won't know how these campaigns are doing until the major, at least some of the major candidates, i.e. Senator Sanders and Joe Biden, the enter or not enter, and Beto O'Rourke. Once they come in, they'll start to shape this campaign up, especially the organization efforts. And we'll go to Charlie Cook. We didn't get over to Charlie Cook. But one of the metrics to look at is how much money you raised. Amy Klobuchar is doing okay there. She hauled in $1 million or so. My take on that is out of Minnesota, she'll be able to get money to at least go to Iowa and go to New Hampshire and go several states beyond New Hampshire. Now, her grassroots funding, I don't know how strong that would be to the other candidates to get in. Incidentally, before we go, Mark Kelly, he's the husband of Gabby Gifford. He's running for the Senate against McSally in Arizona. Good day.